This week on Premiere Quest, the boys discuss Tony Robbins and his secret to success and life advice.
I was kind of imagining she was just washing kind of the upper arch. So like, it's essentially the connection between the leg and the... it's actually called the ankle.
Nice use of synonym there.
What a bunch of blithering idiots. I can't believe I'm still the editor for this podcast. I'm a ghost. I have better things to do.
Welcome, dear listeners, to Premiere Quest Podcast, Season 6. This is the podcast all about life's little quests. My name is Luke, and I'm joined today by what I believe is a very sweaty Richard. Richard, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sweaty are you?
I'm probably about an 8 out of 10 on the sweaty scale right now. It's blistering hot in Auckland, New Zealand, city of sails, and the sun has just been layering down into me today as I sort of prepare myself for another season of Premiere Quest.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm sweaty as well. Here's a quick disclaimer, folks. If you hear some sort of humming in the background, that's a fan, because otherwise I would be getting so sweaty. Couldn't hold this dear microphone.
You know, if you can hear in the background on my end, you can hear some sort of hissing sound. That's, of course, the sun, because it is so hot. You can hear the sun.
This is your skin burning.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think worked about Season 5, Richard?
Season 5 was a bit of a turning point for myself, both physically and emotionally. We embarked... We experienced the highest highs of satisfaction by embarking on quests and the lowest of lows in terms of depression, in terms of not achieving any of those quests. So I'm ready for Season 6 to sort of take it on to the next level and maybe achieve a couple of these quests. But specifically, Season 5, I loved the life advice section. I think that really resonated with me. I feel like we had a real impact on people's lives for the better.
Yeah, it definitely resonated with me and some of our listeners at least. So I think now is a good time to, acknowledge the fact that Season 6 is going to be jam-packed full of life advice. Today's episode is predominantly life advice. I guess the season's going to be split up into us looking at things that are working in the world, people that are succeeding, products that are succeeding, taking those lessons learned and distilling it down into either business ideas or life advice. And so today is no exception to that rule. Today we're kicking things off with a real huge bang, and I'm eager to hear what that is, Richard.
Sorry, I got distracted by some incredible stats, which I'll come back to later. I was just looking at some very powerful numbers on the screen, and I completely missed what you said there. So if you care to repeat it.
Well, listen, all I was saying is that I'm just so thankful that you're such a dedicated and concentrated host, and I was just thanking you for your attention and maybe giving you some pause for thought as to what we're going to be discussing in today's episode.
Following on from the Season 5 trend of life advice, we really want to have the largest impact we can on our fans' lives and hopefully guide them to great riches and avoid the sorrow and shame that a number of our fans experienced as a result of our terrible advice.
That happened to us in Season 5.
And so what we thought was try to look to the man himself, Tony Robbins, and his wise advice that he gives people to help them enrich and better their lives. And we're hoping to be able to study the man, study the monster, and apply his learnings to some of the problems that some of our listeners have out there.
So welcome, folks, today to the first installment of Premiere Quest's Why Does It Work? Featuring Tony Robbins. Now for Schmolery, Schmocklin, Barrelbone, some of our listeners, Richard, who have absolutely no idea who Tony Robbins is. Do you know who he is?
Yep. So if we take this in the literal sense, he's a man, and he works by being a certain height. This is the stats I referenced to earlier in the episode.
Yeah, but why? So his height stats were so intriguing that you just stopped listening.
Standing at 6 foot 5.5 inches or 1.97 meters tall.
Shit.
Yeah, he's pretty damn tall.
Wait, that's 6'5" isn't that tall? That's taller than 6'5".
6 foot 5.5. That extra half inch.
Yeah, exactly.
Extra half inch is about 30 or 40 centimeters in metric units, isn't it?
Jesus.
So he's a pretty big monster, and
He's a kaiju.
Why he works the way he does, he's got this sort of towering presence brought on by two signature trademarks of a towering height and a deep hoarse voice.
Yes.
Being the father of one and being born on, he was being born on February 29th, 1960.
Oh.
He's a leap year baby.
Oh, boy. That's the kind of stat that would distract me.
Maybe that's why he is the way he is, born on one of those rare days.
Yeah, true.
But more simply put, Tony Robbins is a motivational speaker who's done many powerful things. No. Robbins is known for his Robbins is known for his infomercial seminars and self-help books, including Unlimited Power and Awaken the Giant Within. And those companies that he's founded have about $6 billion worth of annual sales.
That's crazy.
You may remember him, Luke, from the 1997 cult classic movie Men in Black, where he played an uncredited alien on a TV monitor.
Seriously? I don't remember that at all. I remember him from his popular Netflix movie, I Am Not Your Guru.
But you may also remember him from the 1996 movie The Cable Guy, starring Tony Robbins.
No.
I think these are pretty small parts he played, but we're trying to sort of boost up his CV here. So we looked back at the life advice we gave over last season, and we figured that we kind of were winging it a bit much, sort of making it up as we went along.
Totally.
Not all of it was very good. So what we're going to do today is apply the Tony Robbins method of self-help to an issue and see if it kind of works in the classic Premier Quest kind of style. So Luke, I hear you've got a problem for us to sort out today.
Yes, I do, and this problem comes from an Instagram follower of ours known as #1 Japanese Surgeon, and it reads, Dear Premier Quest, I need your advice regarding my investment portfolio. I'm a 35-year-old man with no outstanding debt and currently have $10,000 tied up in VHS copies of Speed 2 starring Tom Cruise. I need to diversify, but I'm unsure which markets to play in. I have considered moving into several hundred VHS copies of Mystery Men, but the market instability of early Ben Stiller has put me off. Can you please advise? Love, 35-year-old man.
What's the problem here?
Well, for a single sentence, this guy needs investment advice.
Perfect. So Tony Robbins, there's a 10-step philosophy to problems. We're going to apply the first 5 steps to this problem, and then we're going to try a different problem. Because this problem could just be so rubbish that it won't work, but we'll sort of see how it goes.
But I understand, Richard, just quickly, that Tony Robbins deals with quite a lot of financial stuff. Isn't this one of his areas of expertise?
Absolutely. I think he's got 7 pillars of success, one of them being finances, and the rest being sports related.
Pacific Rim. Knowledge of Pacific Rim.
No, honestly, I'm not really sure, but yes, he's got a lot of finance companies under his belt, so maybe this advice will become relevant for him. As we've sort of alluded to earlier, I was distracted by statistics earlier on the show, and you expressed a little bit of jealousy by yourself not being distracted by statistics regarding the man's height. So we've got this issue. Tony Robbins' #1 piece of advice is to embrace setbacks. So every problem is a gift. Without problems, we would not grow. So what's the setback in this situation?
I'll get onto that setback very shortly, but what I did is do my own research into Tony Robbins, and what I found is that every video of him on YouTube, without fail, has some heartfelt, extremely generic, I assume royalty-free music behind his advice. So I think key to getting into this is that we have that kind of music playing in the background as well. So I'm going to assume that Squire Heath has sorted that out. And I'm going to ask you just to repeat part 1 again, just for our listeners to be 100% sure of what we're getting into.
So embrace setbacks. Every problem is a gift. Without problems, we would not grow. Now, you mentioned something about this individual having a lot of one item and wanting to diversify.
Yes.
What was that item again?
So I guess essentially what his problem is here is that he's got $10,000 tied up in VHS copies of Speed 2. So the setback is that there's zero diversity in his investment portfolio. But if he embraced that and opened up a video store that solely released or hired out copies of Speed 2, in some way maybe it would come a bit of a living meme of a video store, and people would go in there all the time. He could serve craft beer, all that kind of thing. He could generate probably quite a bit of revenue.
What has the Speed 2 DVDs got to do with opening up a craft beer place?
Well, look, he wants to diversify, and there's a huge markup in selling craft beer from a tap. So I'm thinking, open up this VHS store, get a license, call it Speed 2 Bar and Grill, come in there, hire out a VHS copy, and have yourself a delicious craft beer.
See, I see what you're doing here, and it's not quite the Tony Robbins ethos, where what you're trying to do is
God damn it.
is not only are you embracing the setback a little bit with the reference to the DVD, but you're also providing solutions to the problems yet, and we're not quite there yet. So I was thinking more along the lines of, we have to embrace this setback where the advice we give solely relates to this possession of 10,000 DVDs of Speed 2.
It's VHS, just to be clear.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so what does the embracing just have to be him saying, yes, I own up to the fact I have these copies and I embrace this challenge?
Yes, so various things you could do with that many DVDs is every day send a copy to Keanu Reeves' house for 10,000 days.
Listen, you seem quite adamant to be converting these VHS to DVD, so what's the issue there for you? Why do you hate VHS so much?
I'm just completely missing the point here today. VHS makes it a little more tricky. As we know, the Postal Service doesn't accept VHS, so we're going to have to scrap that idea.
Yeah.
VHS, there's a lot of plastic containers and there's a lot of sort of tape on the inside. So what I sort of propose is that he melts the VHSs down and forms all the plastic into some fake weapons and robs a bank and ties everyone up with the tape from the inside of the VHS, hence getting money from the banks and diversifying his investment.
Listen, this is a very diverse sort of a response. It also seems to be problem solving, which you just told me off for earlier because we hadn't gone through the other steps.
But Luke, moving on to step 2, there are no limitations.
What do you mean? To what?
If you can't, you must, and if you must, you can.
If you can't, you say that again?
So this is Tony Robbins' sage life advice on there are no limitations. Quote, if you can't, you must, and if you must, you can. End quote.
If you can't, you must, and if you must, you can. So what this guy effectively seems, he can't bring himself to buy several hundred VHS copies of Mystery Men because of his worries about the market instability of Ben Stiller. So effectively he's saying he can't bring himself to do this. But what our advice is, you must do this. Number one Japanese surgeon, you must buy these copies of Mystery Men. And because you must do it, you can do it.
I think we've just overcome a mental barrier there, and we've taken it to the next level. That's some pretty solid Tony Robbins advice there, Luke. I'm proud of you.
Fuck yeah, I feel real Robbins right now.
As good as your advice is, as we move on to step 3, you have to be willing to change. So that's our mindset. So if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. And what you're sort of pitching here is some VHS for other VHSs, which is falling into the classic trap. So how do we sort of embrace change in this situation?
I'd like to issue my first formal apology for Season 6, and that's to you, Richard. Clearly, your repetitive mentioning of DVDs earlier was foreshadowing the fact that I'm about to give the advice that this number one Japanese surgeon should maybe consider picking up these copies of Mystery Men in either DVD or Blu-ray cassette.
Could you imagine going along to a Tony Robbins cinema saying you got this huge collection of VHSs and his advice for you to change is to change them to Blu-ray?
That's actually an interesting point. Changing them to Blu-ray means that you're just exchanging them for what is now the common commodity in viewing movies, but for streaming them. So what Tony Robbins might say is, I need you to take it back. I need you to get what was before VHS, because that's probably going to be weirder. And so maybe number one Japanese surgeon needs to purchase the actual film reels that were used to show Speed 2 in cinemas back in the late 90s.
You've done it again, Luke. You finished off your piece of advice and you've fallen into the trap of the next piece of advice. Where step 4, don't focus on your fears. In which case, he was fearing that he wasn't well diversified, and you've recommend that he goes back and get some old video players that they had in cinemas to be able to play Speed 2 VHSs or similar.
I think we can deep dive into this a little bit. I think, yes, he seems to fear the diversity issue that he's got in his collection. But what if you were the best surgeon in Japan, the number one Japanese surgeon, Richard, what would you fear the most?
Excluding mafia retaliation, I would fear these VHSs of mine eventually aging and therefore losing their value and not being able to sell them to be able to achieve that diversification.
That's exactly right. And did you just issue an extremely obscure reference to the American Office? Early awards for this season: Definitely nominations are coming in for you, Richard, hard and fast for that, from listener Schmo Larry, who of course is addicted to the American Office.
So just going back on that, do not focus on your fears. Focus on where you want to go.
I was trying to avoid it.
Focus on where you want to go, not on what you fear. And we've kind of covered that off, so we're going to go into the final one for number one Japanese surgeon, and that's focus on solutions. And there you have it. Another problem solved by Premier Quest.
So if we're going to write an Instagram response back to this character, what are we actually going to say? What is our final recommendation?
We're going to say, hey, there's no time like the present. Embrace setbacks. There are no limits. You got to change. Don't focus on your fears and focus on the solutions, and you'll achieve a diversified portfolio.
That is real Tony Robbins. Listen, if you can't get rid of these copies of Speed 2 number one Japanese surgeon, you must get rid of these copies of Speed 2 Japanese surgeon. And if you must, then you can, and that's the solution. And then Robbins it up in this house, baby. It's Robbins. It's Robbins time, baby.
And if you're looking for some tangible diversification, head along to premierquest.com today and pick up some of that Premier Quest coffee to diversify your investments.
Actually, not a bad idea, number one Japanese surgeon. You could probably use a bit of caffeine in that surgical theatre that you spend some time in, just to steady that hand.
How did you think that went, Luke?
Sorry. How did I think that went? It's quite difficult to get into the mindset of Tony Robbins.
Just pretend you're tall.
Yeah, I am pretending I'm tall. I'm actually standing up quite on top of my bed. But it's more like, you know what the solution to the problem is at the very, very start of reading the problem. But Tony Robbins' gift is to hype himself up and the audience up to like the point of just they're brimming with excitement. They're going to burst. And then you offer your very generic solution. And I don't think we're very good at that because we're just so solutions focused.
So maybe it's a bit of time we brainstorm how to get people pumped up for this next segment. If you got no other choice, chow down on some of that Premier Quest coffee. That'll get you jittery and get you excited. I don't know. How should we pump up the listeners here?
Well, I think maybe what Tony Robbins does to great effect is, of course, he's got the heartfelt music, but he repeats words all the time. So at the end of every kind of third or fourth sentence, he'll use a synonym for the adjective that he's using, and he repeats it 3 or 4 times. And listeners, you also note people quite high up in corporate business do this all the time. Like they'll be like, listen, what you brought to the table today are some great ideas, some great thoughts. You know, another synonym for ideas and thoughts. Ideas, thoughts. Richard, finish me off.
Revelations.
It's average. We need, by the end of season 6, to bring out the Tony Robbins in both of us. I think that needs to be one of our goals, because at the moment, yes, we sort of can read his methods, but we can't quite get into his skull. I'm not in his skull.
My takeaway from this is to impersonate an inspirational speaker. You just need to know a truckload of synonyms and you'll be fine.
Yes, and you need to be in their skull.
Well, figuratively or literally?
You also need to ask rhetorical questions and then immediately answer them.
Where are we going to get a skull from?
He's a big guy, so it's got to be a gigantic skull too. So I don't know, any listeners out there who have access to giant skulls, maybe your friend or family member has gigantism, let us know and we'll see what we can do. Maybe a couple bags of Premier Quest coffee per skull.
Maybe if we want Tony Robbins' skull, we could start up a business that provides caskets for the dead. Because obviously he's a large guy, so maybe the typical caskets won't fit his body. So if we get in there early and build him a custom casket for his corpse when he eventually passes, we'll be able to take his skull and climb inside it.
And use it like a rocket ship.
That's not my best idea.
No, it's good. It's good. But I worry that he's the kind of guy who's going to have himself cryogenically frozen. Like, I'd almost bet all my money on it. So maybe we need to start a cryogenics company and get him on board. And then when he comes in and we cut his head off to cryogenically freeze it, we actually just take his skull.
I reckon we just take some 3D scans of his head and get a 3D printer and print out a skull of his head.
Not a bad idea. Any listeners out there who have access to a fMRI machine that will allow us to scan Tony Robbins' head? Please get in touch.
All right, next problem, Luke. I feel like we're on a roll here. We've solved one problem with some amazing advice. I'm looking forward to the second issue.
This isn't actually the second response that we got back, but I'm going to move on to this because I feel like we're really going to knock this second one out of the park. Okay, so here it comes. This comes from Schmocky. I have a pair of brown leather shoes I wear to work, as well as formal events, weddings, funerals, etc., that are starting to fall apart. At what point do I need to bite the bullet and replace them?
I really thought you were going to read out the advice on the shower stuff.
No, that's the one we're going to knock out of the park. So there's a little teaser for the listeners. Stay to the end of the episode, you'll hear about showers.
Because there's only 5 pieces of advice left, we'll use 2 of them on this situation and then three of them on the last
Perfect.
one. So in summary, we've got someone who's got some old brown shoes that are falling apart and they want to bite the bullet to buy some new ones.
Yes. Well, they maybe want to bite the bullet, but what they really need from us is some guidance about, I guess it's decision making. It's the ability to leave things in your past behind and move on. So does Tony Robbins have anything that would help us with that?
Step number 6, take action. A real decision is measured by the fact that you've taken a new action. If there's no action, you haven't truly decided.
Yeah, so Schmocky, I think the action is that initially you need to throw your old shoes out, at which point you're forced to take action and buy a new pair.
Now, Luke, I'm a little bit concerned because it's about 8 p.m. on a Monday evening. Shops are probably closing. If they throw out their shoes now, they won't have any shoes to wear until the shops open tomorrow at 10 a.m.
True, but due to the magic of editing, we'll put this episode out at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, giving Schmocky plenty of time to pop on in to his local cobbler and buy a nice new pair of brown leather shoes.
Man, it must look pretty bad going into a shoe shop where you're not wearing any shoes at the time. That's pretty good. So, moving on to number 7, ask good questions. Successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers.
True.
So, what sort of questions can Schmocky ask to help sort of reach this decision point in their life?
Well, weirdly, I think it's more about what questions can we ask. Like, for instance, how often do people look at Schmocky's feet? Because if it's not all that often, he's not going to have to bite the bullet and get rid of these shoes as quickly as we maybe suggested him with point 6.
Yeah, but I've just received a little note from our editor here that tells me that Schmocky is a world-class handstand performer, so people will be looking at his feet constantly.
Common misconception with handstand artists is that you'd think people were constantly looking at their hands because the hand is, of course, in the title of their name. But as Richard's correctly pointed out, people are always looking at the feet because you're always looking, oh, are they going to tip? Is he going to fall forward or back? And with that information from Squire Heath, it looks like, yes, perhaps Schmocky's going to have to take action very soon.
Another sort of question is, why can't they just fix up the current pair of shoes they've got? And do we have any solutions for that?
Yes, perhaps Schmocky is somewhat of a victim of today's consumer culture. Instead of looking to repair his shoes, he's obviously just prepared to throw them out and buy new ones. And I think big tech has a lot to answer for in this space. You know, the likes of Apple constantly taking people to court to preserve their right to repair, or to decline the right to repair, I should say. And perhaps that means that maybe Lockie needs to look to get a new cell phone.
And possibly a packet of Premier Quest coffee, available now at premierquest.com.
That's exactly right. I didn't want to mention it, but of course the coffee grounds are very brown, and if you wet them and rub them over your brown leather shoes, they'll cover up a lot of that scuffing, and that could add 3-4 weeks to the life of those shoes.
Man, we are full of solutions today. That is some powerful advice.
Yes.
And Tony Robbins would be proud of you once
huge.
again. Let's move on to today's last problem and see if we can sort of send this home with the climax of Tony Robbins.
Oh, that sounds gross. But anyway, here's a question that's coming from Schmaddy Schmashmod. When you're cleaning yourself in the shower, how much effort are you really meant to put into cleaning your feet? Is the soapy water washing over them sufficient? Now, points to Schmaddy Schmashmod, because this is truly one of the most humorous questions we've had sent in. And actually, when you think about it, it's a pretty timely time for us to consider this. You know, it's summer in New Zealand. People have got dirty feet out there because they've been wearing jandals.
You know, there's a lot of potential Premier Quest solutions to this, but we're going to stick to the formula of Tony Robbins' advice. And he's got 3 final pieces of advice for this issue of how much they're supposed to clean their feet in the shower. So step 8, make the life you dreamed of. Here we go. There's a bit more to this. I challenge you to make your life a masterpiece. I challenge you to join the ranks of those people who live what they teach, who walk their talk.
Okay, so if Schmaddie wants to make her life a masterpiece, and the thing that is theoretically currently prohibiting her from achieving that goal is her dirty feet, maybe she's completely preoccupied by this problem. It's not so much that her feet are dirty, it's that she can't stop thinking about it, and she's creating a prison of thought in her mind solely constructed around this issue. So, Richard, what's your advice?
Well, if she wants to make the life she's dreamed of, I suggest that she clean her feet or her downstairs hands. I was just trying a synonym there.
It would be Schmockie's moneymakers as well, because of course in the handstand industry, who got beautiful clean feet, it shows that you're almost always walking on your hands, so you must be very, very talented.
And I think that's quite a timely place to move into advice number 9. Be willing to raise your standards for what you accept in life.
Yeah, right. So at the moment, Schmaddie's accepting maybe kind of 30% clean feet. If she's actually just letting the soap wash across, she's only getting the top. And if she's not scrubbing, yeah, I think 30% is a good guess. So you need to raise those expectations, Schmaddie. You need to make yourself a 70% girl minimum.
Yeah, maybe just wash the bottoms of your feet and the toes and leave the tops from here on out.
What do you mean leave the tops?
Because isn't that the part that she's been washing? You're saying 30%. Which 30%? If we've got 10 toes, are we saying that she's washing 3 toes each night?
I was kind of imagining she was just washing kind of the upper arch. So like essentially the connection between the leg and the... Oh, it's actually called the ankle.
No, it's just a synonym there.
Oh no, I've terribly sprayed my upper arch.
I think for simplicity's sake, we're using percentages. Why don't we just base this on number of toes she's washing?
Yeah, but then again, I don't want to go down that dark path of assuming Schmaddie either has 10 or more or less toes. We don't know too much about this person.
So what's your final sort of advice on accepting standards in your life?
If she wants to make the best version of herself possible, she's going to need to clean her feet at least 70% perfectly clean each wash, and that's not happening with just letting the soap go across, because as you know, at least 50% of your foot's underneath the actual what we call the upper arch. So final advice, you got to get hands in, you got to muck in.
Luke, you're giving some pretty serious in-depth advice for washing your feet from 30% of the foot to 70% of the foot. And that takes us perfectly to Tony Robbins' final piece of advice, which is don't focus on the small things in life.
So are you suggesting that this is one of the small things?
He goes on to say, most people fail in life because they major in minor things. So if she becomes a bit of a foot washing expert and potentially dedicates an extra 4 hours a day to get that percentage up from 30% of the foot to 70% of the foot, she could be missing the boat on some of these other issues.
Yeah.
Who are we to say? Like, cleanliness is next to godliness. And if God had 70% clean feet, maybe then his brown loafers wouldn't fall apart.
That's exactly right. And of course, Jesus famously washed the feet of his followers at one point in the New Testament, which brings into question, exactly how was Jesus washing those feet? Was he letting just the suds flow over the top, or was he really getting in there and mucking in? And if he was he doing so because he considered this to be not one of life's little things? Did he consider feet cleanliness next to godliness?
So there's our sort of final piece of advice. Washing your feet more thoroughly is not a small mundane task, but it's a huge, important, major life event.
At least if you're a follower of Christ.
Yeah, and we encourage you to go and discuss with your neighbours and friends and start a healthy debate on this.
That 10th revelation has really hit me to the core, and the reason, Richard, is that would you consider Premier Quest one of life's little things? Like, it's extremely niche. Does that mean that maybe we're wasting our time?
Well, We have released very moderate size coffee bags for sale. So maybe if we embrace the Tony Robbins life advice here, we should start releasing coffee in 10 kilo, 20 kilo bags to our listeners. Or have I missed the point here?
No, I don't think that you have. But what I have realised from your little brief description is that we haven't actually answered the question of Tony Robbins, why it works. Richard, what's your elevator pitch as to why people engage with Tony Robbins?
He breaks things down into 10 steps, provides some quotes and some anecdotes, and in the end says, don't worry about the little stuff, and sort of moves on.
That's exactly right. And for me, I think what works from him is his gigantic size. And that's it from Premier Quest.
So that
Thanks for tuning into Why It Works Part 1.
where his advice is just be tall.
Listen, the bigger the better. If you're one of our big boy listeners, consider getting into the life advice game.
And that is Why It Works.
Part 1, Why It Works Part 1. And it's been a true pleasure to record with you today, Richard. Seems like you were kind of talking about coffee a little bit. Do you want to give that a plug before we depart?
Sales are rolling in now, but Premier Quest Java only available in New Zealand.
Please buy it, guys. Please buy it, because Richard bought a coffee sealing device. It needs to recoup expenses.
An industrial quality coffee sealing advice. And all proceeds from the coffee goes to fundraise our premier quest of eventually getting to Africa and renting a houseboat.
Yeah, but at least we'd love to be able to pay for our monthly hostage fees. So yeah, please buy it back. Even if you don't like coffee, just buy it and then post it on the Instagram for the fun fact that you've got a lavender bag. Anyway, that's it from us, folks. Please like and subscribe to us on YouTube, because of course these episodes are now live on YouTube.